Without any further ado, please welcome on stage the CEO and the great speaker, Matias Myllyrinne. Matias.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Means a lot. Thank you for those really warm words of welcome. And thank you for Ilkka. Ilkka is really on the cutting edge with Supercell, and they're doing really exciting stuff over there. Today, I'd like to talk a bit about the games industry and kind of the new deal that we have there. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to share some of the specifics of our plan, but I'll talk a bit about where we see the industry going and kind of what conclusions we're drawing. And the smart ones in the crowd can probably come to conclusions of what we're building at Remedy as well. So, yeah. The new deal is kind of where I started my thinking as I started building this presentation. And I'll get back to that a little later. Here we go. Yes, global impact. So I was thinking about this for a while. I've been doing games and involved with Remedy since 1999, but I really can't think of a time when so few have been able to entertain so many. And that's really one of the central themes for us. Let's see. Bingo. So the extreme example is in these cases when you go on stage and you're finding your PowerPoint presentation, you try to think of extreme examples. And the most extreme example that I could think of the few entertaining many was the example of Robert May. So Robert May is an 8th grader in the United States, a 14-year-old guy whose mom submitted his iPhone game to Apple. Now that game has been downloaded over 9 million times to date. And really, if you start thinking about this, what factors need to be in place that one person can entertain over 9 million people? Obviously, you need a lot of technology in there, you need a customer base, you need a way for them to share word of mouth, and a lot of factors need to be in play. It's a long way from kind of the early days of Remedy and before, when some of our guys would take their own games from an Amiga game that they've kind of copied themselves, they'd take it to the retailer, and they were lucky if they sold 1,000 units. 1,000 units is kind of like ghetto gold. But these days, we're talking about 9 million units, which is a significant growth. Talking about growth, the games industry is the fastest growing major form of entertainment today. So it's about 55 billion this year in terms of software sales alone, and it continues to grow very strongly. Now there's been a lot of talk about the death of traditional gaming. That's actually not true. If we look forward, if we look at the market analysts' forecasts, they're forecasting about 4 to 5% growth in the quote-unquote traditional gaming sector. But the real growth vectors are coming from online, mobile, and social, where the compounded average growth rate is about 24 to 25% a year. But even contrasting back to 2005, the games industry has grown by about 50%. That's a significant growth if you look at movies or music, by contrast. So if we look at the games industry, previously really the games industry has been defined by the likes of Nintendo, Sony, Sega, and Microsoft, really the platform holders. Now, increasingly, it's obviously it's going into a service model where these platforms obviously have their ecosystems with PlayStation Network, Xbox Live, and so forth. But games are at the center of the entire experience, and they're what really drives these platforms and the ecosystems. And social media help to tie it in. Now, this kind of paradigm is being increasingly challenged by the likes of Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook. These new entrants don't have an existing business to protect. They don't have an established business to protect. They don't need to sell their hardware at retailers. They can break the business models. Now, it's a very interesting time in the games industry where we have these established players changing and evolving and really competing with these new entrants into the market. And I think that this is a really kind of serendipitous time for the aggressive and the quick. So I think it's the new deal in the games industry. I think the analogy is to, I don't know how many of you play poker, but if you come to a table where somebody's holding 2 aces, somebody's holding a pair of jacks, and they have a huge stack on the table in front of them, that's the analogy to what the games industry was before. It's really, really hard to gain an edge and to break through in that market. But as the cards are dealt again and everybody has the same stack, you're in an even playing field. So for example, with Death Rally, a very small budget production that we did with a very talented local developer for the iPhone and the iPad, we were able to compete with the biggest companies in the world. We were essentially number one, I think, in 72 markets on the iPad. The break even on that game, we broke even in about 3 days, and everything's been pure profit ever since. So it's a very lucrative market. And we'll be seeing more of that, of course, in the future as well. But it's games as a service. You don't walk away from that. You keep on updating it. We just brought in multiplayer for Death Rally, and you keep on bringing new life into that franchise as well. 2011 also marks a tipping point in the games industry. This is the first year when digital revenues in North America will supersede traditional retail revenues. So this is really the tipping point in many ways. North America is ahead of some of the markets, whereas on the other hand, Asia has always been digital and microtransaction driven to a vast degree. But I think North American market is the key market for us. Certainly over 50% of our sales come from North America, and that's an interesting market to see how it evolves. Now, it might be that traditional games such as Alan Wake, which we released with Microsoft last year, are actually updated as a service. So we brought in new additional episodes. The game was built to structure that of a TV series. So we would have one episode end, the next one start with previously on Alan Wake, and then we would continue. And that felt like a natural structure for telling the story. That also allowed us to bring in additional episodes after the season ended. So that was a terrific model there as well. And I think we're all exploring kind of different ways of keeping the franchises alive and keeping them relevant quicker and more interestingly, bringing new ways to interact with the audience as well, not only to sheerly monetize on them. Now, a lot of things are changing. And I love my monkey story, so if some of you have heard it, I do apologize. But what can we learn about change from monkeys? So one, there's a Darwinistic view. As your environment, your ecosystem changes, unless you adapt and you change into that ecosystem, you'll either be marginalized or you'll die. Now, we at Remedy like to adapt, and we like to be changing, so that's kind of a given for us as well. But if we don't do that, we will be marginalized, and we will eventually die. I think that's just a given in this industry. Now, change in monkeys. So the university researchers, I think it was Berkeley or someplace on the West Coast, they did an experiment with monkeys. They placed 8 monkeys into a cage, and they put a banana tree in the middle of that cage. As the monkeys would approach the banana tree, they would spray cold water on top of the monkeys. Now, it turns out that monkeys don't like to be wet by cold water. So the monkeys very quickly learned not to approach the banana tree. And what they did next was they removed one of these monkeys and put a new monkey in who hadn't been taught the cold shower routine. So as the new monkey approaches the banana tree, guess what happens? Anybody? So the others, administer a traditional prison beatdown on that guy. So they really kick the shit out of him as he's approaching the banana tree. They replace the next monkey, and guess what happens? Same routine all over again. They gang up on him and kick the shit out of him. And they keep on repeating this until all the 8 monkeys have been replaced, and none of those monkeys have experienced the cold shower. They keep on administering the beatdowns without actually knowing why they're doing it. So just to leave that to a seed of thought there about our organizations and a changing environment and how we keep on behaving. I think branding is key. We are increasingly building entertainment experiences. We are not only building one game, we're building a series of games. We're building something that can transcend to different media. We're building something that can be accessed through different devices and experienced through different forms of entertainment, either interactive entertainment or passive entertainment. And I think that's kind of been the golden key for us. So in our history, we've built franchises with revenues in retail in excess of $500 million. If we look back at the day, kind of with the Max Payne film, for example, we closed that deal in 2001 before the game came out. And that was kind of done as an afterthought in many ways. With Alan Wake, we took the steps to build it as we were building the game kind of at the latter part of development. So we had a prequel series, 6 episodes leading to the events of the game. When the game launched, we had, obviously, an art book, a strategy guide, a novel, and these different access points for the fans to interact with the brand. I think increasingly in the future, we'll be building these from the get-go and building something, not only building a game, but also building these other ideas and these other forms of entertainment as we go along. So there's been a lot of talk of transmedia. I don't think it's really been done properly to date yet. But I think that's one of the golden kind of paths for the future as well. And this is a very complicated slide, but I think if we look at the games industry, you can look at platforms in terms of how open they are and how closed they are. Then we can look at gameplay experiences of how casual or how core they are. And I think the interesting battleground will be with core gamers playing on open platforms. I don't know whether it's soft core or whatever you want to call it, but I think that's a very interesting marketplace to be at. And there's a lot of contenders for that space. But if we look at kind of the gameplay mechanics and the production values of true AAA titles, Battlefield, Uncharted 3, Alan Wake, Halo, and you bring those into an ecosystem that's more open and more accessible, I think there's a very interesting mix there. And I think we'll see increasingly players try to enter that space as well. Finally, last but not least, how do we produce these games? As these productions are growing faster and bigger and larger and you're hitting multiple platforms, you need to have a flexible production environment. And that, to me, means that you need a network that's scalable and that can ramp up and to meet the challenges rapidly. So building a factory isn't key. I know there's a lot of studios out there who build a 3,000 head studio. That's essentially a factory, for example, in Montreal. But they're very different core competencies. If you build a factory, you're essentially building efficiency. You're producing aspirin quicker and at a lower cost. Whereas I think we view ourselves as kind of the R&D lab of a pharmaceutical company where you're doing innovation, you're building something new, you're taking risks, and I think that's a much more interesting position to be in, and it's certainly something that we thrive on at Remedy. And that requires a global partner network that you can actually produce these things. And obviously, you need to be born global from day one, and that's one of the things that we've always been. We don't really have a domestic market here. Luckily, I think that's a blessing for a lot of the Finnish companies, and you need to be hitting your international markets. And a reflection of that should be that your team should be open, at least, to an international talent pool. And we're lucky to have people from all around the world at Remedy. Finally, I'd like to leave my contact information there. I'd love to hear from you. We're in a very interesting stage, and different ideas and convergences are happening all over. Thank you so much.